As soon as my daughter Samantha hung up the phone, I immediately realized that something was wrong. She usually didn't respond so nonchalantly and indifferently. Sitting in my living room, wrapped in a warm woolen blanket, I looked at the twinkling lights outside, and this only increased my anxiety. The worry for Samantha and her husband Michael, and even more so for my grandson, became unbearable to me. But they're on vacation abroad, and I had to wait 3 days before they came back. There was no usual joy and laughter in this conversation, which they shared after such trips. Over the next couple of days, I tried to occupy myself with reading and knitting, but my heart was not in place. And so, when I was walking past their house to check my mail, as I usually do when they are away, I heard a quiet cry for help. It was the voice of my 5-year-old grandson. My world froze. I used my spare key to get in, and my horror knew no bounds. The grandson was tied up with ropes and hidden in a closet. My daughter and son-in-law, whatever they are, have clearly done something terrible. It was a serious crime against an innocent child. I, Mary, a grandmother and widow, who had been kept at home by the cold weather and loneliness after her husband's death for the last few years, suddenly found a new purpose. My daughter and son-in-law must be held accountable for their actions. After all, my love for my grandchildren, especially for my youngest granddaughter Mia, whom I saw much less often than I would like, always made me feel needed and loved. Every time Mia told me, "I love you, Grandma," my heart was filled with warmth and love, which I tried to give her in return by buying gifts and sending pocket money. My concerns about Samantha and Michael's approach to parenting turned out to be well-founded. I've always been afraid that my daughter puts her needs ahead of her child's, and Michael, her husband, doesn't show proper affection for Mia. Remembering how I raised Samantha, full of love, support, and care, I now realized that I could not remain silent about what was happening. Despite my reluctance to interfere in my daughter's parenting decisions, I knew that my silence was over. To be honest, I knew that anything I said to Samantha would probably be taken with hostility, and they wouldn't want to listen to me. Besides, if my persistent reproaches had accidentally aggravated Samantha's stress, it could have hurt Mia. Therefore, despite my conflicting feelings and concern for the well-being of my granddaughter, I decided not to interfere too actively in their parental decisions. Although it was lonely for me not to see Mia often, I could still visit her when I felt the need. After all, they now lived in the same spacious house where I spent the last years with my late husband. It became too much for me to manage this big house after his death, and I handed it over to Samantha and Michael, keeping the spare key. Sometimes I found myself thinking that I would like to visit them and see Mia, even if it was done spontaneously. One day I had the opportunity to walk past their house when I was in the area. My old friend, a classmate from high school, was invited next door, and he called me at the same time. I assumed that we would just remember old times, but the conversation took an unexpected and much more serious turn. "Mary, do you really know what's going on with Mia?" "What is it?" he asked, as if hinting at something important. "Of course, she's my granddaughter." "How could I not know?" I replied, not fully realizing the meaning of his question. "No, that's not what I meant," he continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Maybe Mia is being abused." These words made my heart freeze. "What do you mean?" My voice sounded shocked and incredulous. My friend began to tell me the details he had heard from the neighbors. According to him, Samantha and Michael often left early in the morning and returned late at night, leaving Mia alone. The neighbors began to worry, seeing the girl often alone on the balcony. When they tried to talk to Mia or express their concerns to Samantha, they received vague and confusing answers. Kneeling down from shock and pain, realizing that Mia could have suffered without my knowledge, I felt the world begin to spin around me. My friend tried to comfort me. "We don't know for sure, it's just a rumor." But I thought I should mention it. "Maybe you could stop by their house on the way back?" These words made me think. I couldn't sit idly by anymore. Something had to be done. Taking care of myself, I decided that on the way home I would stop by Samantha and Michael. I have to see my granddaughter and make sure she's okay. I couldn't help but think how my daughter and son-in-law could allow such behavior. Deep down, I believed that I had raised Samantha properly, and I couldn't figure out where I had made a mistake. My friend, noticing my excitement, advised me to check my well-being, but I couldn't just sit back. I quickly left the house and went to the house of my daughter and son-in-law. My hands were shaking slightly when I pressed the doorbell. There was no sign of life inside, only the echo of my call echoed through the empty house. "They're not at home," I muttered, about to leave, but suddenly I thought I heard a faint call for help. My hearing had deteriorated recently, and it was difficult to pick up quiet sounds, but I couldn't just walk away. I stopped, listening. No answer. Maybe I misheard? I was about to leave the house, but suddenly I clearly heard a desperate cry for help. A chill on the skin, it could only be Mia. As a loving grandmother, I couldn't ignore it. Considering that my daughter and son-in-law were probably somewhere far away, but even if they had left their child alone, why would she call for help? My mind instantly turned to the worst possible possibilities, and I quickly used the spare key to enter the house. "Mia, Mia, where are you?" My voice reached her, and not too far away I heard Mia's reply, "Grandma, yes, it's Grandma, I'm here." Mia informed me that she was in the closet. My worst fears have come true. Mia was left tied up in a tight coil of rope inside the closet. "Mia, how could this happen?" In desperation, I grab onto the rope, trying to free it as quickly as possible, but the knots resisted my efforts. The constriction was strong, leaving faint marks on Mia's skin. I grabbed the nearest scissors and managed to free her from her bonds. "Grandma, Mom and Dad are not here," Mia's voice trembled, resembling a fledgling bird frightened by an external threat. "They're not here, it's okay, you're safe now." While I was talking, Mia threw herself into my arms. Tears were streaming down her face. My wet, raked clothes didn't matter. But I realized that it is impossible to watch this in silence. My heart was flooded with a sense of bitterness and determination, and I knew that it was necessary to act immediately. I was faced with a difficult task. How can I protect Mia and teach Samantha and her husband a lesson? With every minute I spent in this cold, unbiased hospital corridor, I realized that drastic measures were needed. Having decided to act through official authorities, I went to a lawyer. It was necessary to make a plan to ensure the safety of my granddaughter and, perhaps, even change the terms of custody. On the way to the lawyer's office, my thoughts went back to the past. How could it happen that Samantha, whom my husband and I raised with such love and care, turned away from her own children? My memories were filled with moments when my husband and I taught her the value of family and responsibility, which now seemed alien to her. In the lawyer's office, I outlined the whole situation, from its beginning to the latest disturbing events. We discussed the possibility of filing a lawsuit for temporary deprivation of parental rights in order to establish temporary custody of Mia for me. The lawyer was resolute and suggested starting by collecting all the necessary documents, including medical reports and evidence confirming the negligent attitude of the parents. When I left the office, I felt the heavy weight of responsibility, but also a strange relief from the realization that I had finally begun to act. I knew that the path would be difficult and possibly full of litigation and family conflicts, but protecting Mia became my main goal. My resolve was strong, but my heart still couldn't bear the thought of my daughter's betrayal. There were days ahead filled with legal procedures and, perhaps, disappointments, but I was ready to stand guard over my granddaughter's well-being, no matter what. Accusing me of not having the right to do this without her consent. She sounded both shocked and outraged, her words intertwined with questions and threats. "How could you sell the house while we were away?" "This is my property," she shouted into the phone. However, I remained calm, my voice was even and confident. "Samantha, I did what I thought was right. You and Michael left Mia alone in this state. I had to act to protect her." My words were weighty and clear. I felt like a defender of my granddaughter in this situation. My conversation with my daughter was filled with tension. Every word she said testified to her dissatisfaction and anger. But I knew I had to stand my ground. This move to sell the house was part of my plan, to force them to pay attention to the seriousness of the situation, realize their mistakes and reconsider their priorities. Samantha continued to speak angrily, while Michael tried to calm the situation, realizing that a scandal would not solve the problem. "We need to talk about this face to face. We can't keep talking like this," he suggested in a more peaceful tone. I agreed to the meeting. It was important to discuss everything openly and honestly, especially Mia's protection and her future. Deep down, I hoped that this meeting would help them understand the depth and seriousness of the problem, and that they would finally begin to act as responsible parents. "Samantha, Michael, I understand you. Parenthood is not just a responsibility, it is a heavy burden. And I'm not going to blame you for wanting to get rid of this burden. But there are rules and obligations that we cannot ignore for our own convenience." I looked at their confused faces, trying not to make my words sound judicial. "You are now free from parental obligations, yes, and Mia will be under my care. This will give you the opportunity to reconsider your life, your priorities. Maybe you'll find something that really brings you joy." My words sounded soft, but each of them was weighty. I hoped that they would hear in them not only a release from responsibilities, but also an opportunity for self-reflection. Samantha looked at me with mixed feelings of disbelief and gratitude. Michael nodded silently, his expression tired, but there was gratitude in it. "Thank you, Mom. Perhaps you are right. We really need a break," Samantha finally said. I nodded, realizing that my actions, although they seemed harsh, brought some clarity to this chaos. Now that Mia is with me, I will provide her with everything she needs to recover and have a happy life. "She deserves it," I said confidently. After exchanging a few last words about the practical aspects of transferring custody and responsibilities, I felt the tension begin to subside. I knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but I also knew that Mia was safe now, and that was the most important thing. When Samantha and Michael left, I turned to Mia, who was still standing next to me, holding my hand. "It's going to be okay, honey. You're with Grandma now," I said confidently, trying to banish the remnants of my anxiety and replace them with the promise of a better future for both of us. "Especially on your hobbies and travels, which you justified as a necessity for health." I took a deep breath, looking back at the messy lifestyle you've led over the years. With every word I said, Samantha seemed more scared and confused. All these years, she probably thought that her actions would go unnoticed, that she would be able to evade responsibility. However, now reality was knocking on the door with inevitability. "You should have been thinking about the future, but instead you chose instant pleasure. I can't let you keep living like this, especially when it's hurting Mia," I said, my voice firm and peremptory. Samantha suddenly began to justify herself, trying to explain her actions as misunderstandings and temporary difficulties. But I knew that these were just empty words, an attempt to evade responsibility. "Now that the case has come to court and the lawyers are already involved, you will face consequences not only in the form of arrest, but also financial lawsuits that could seriously affect your future," I continued. "The investigation revealed that you misused funds that were intended to provide for Mia, and this will lead to harsh measures." Michael, who had remained mostly in the shadows up to this point, now looked deeply thoughtful. He seemed to be beginning to realize the full extent of the disaster they were immersed in. There was a flash of realization in his eyes that their actions had not only destroyed the relationship in the family, but also jeopardized their own future. We really didn't think it would go this far," Michael said softly, his voice full of remorse. "It's too late to change anything now. Your actions have consequences, and you have to accept them," I concluded, feeling a mixture of bitterness and satisfaction that the truth had been revealed, but also sadness at the broken family ties. Looking at their confused and worried faces, I realized that my path of raising Mia would be difficult. But I was ready to take on this responsibility, protecting her from further harm and striving to build for her the healthy and happy life she deserves. It was a new initial stage in my life and in the life of my granddaughter, which we are starting with a clean slate, far from past mistakes and misconceptions. That she spends a lot of time alone. My anxiety increased when I realized that Mia might be left unattended all day, which is absolutely unacceptable for a child her age. I couldn't imagine how she felt being alone in such a big house. My friend continued, his voice careful and quiet. I've seen her sometimes playing in the yard by herself, and she seems sad. I don't know if they leave her with a babysitter, but I've never seen anyone come or go during the day. My friend's words sunk into my soul. I knew I had to do something. There are too many questions and too few answers. The moment I found out about Mia's possible loneliness, my heart ached. The decision came spontaneously. I have to visit my daughter's house and make sure that everything is okay with Mia. Saying goodbye to my friend, I thanked him for his concern and information, and then headed to Samantha and Michael's house. With each step, my excitement grew. The thought of Mia, perhaps alone, made me quicken my pace. As I approached the house, I immediately noticed the silence, which seemed unpleasant and abnormal for a house where a child should live. I used my spare key to enter quietly, not wanting to give the impression of an intrusion, but with the intention of making sure my granddaughter was safe. As I entered, I looked around the spacious, but empty rooms. The first thing I heard was the soft sound of the TV from the living room. I walked slowly over there and saw Mia sitting alone, staring intently at the screen. She didn't notice my arrival, immersed in the world of cartoons. Mia, darling, how did you end up here alone? I asked, coming closer. She turned around, her face lit up with a smile at the sight of me. Grandma, she exclaimed joyfully and threw herself into my arms. Her hugs warmed my heart, but I couldn't take my mind off the excitement that my friend's words caused. Honey, do you often stay here alone? I asked cautiously, trying to understand the situation without scaring her. Sometimes when Mom and Dad leave. They say they'll be back soon, but it doesn't happen very quickly, she replied, which only increased my fears. From that moment on, I realized that I couldn't leave everything as it was. I needed to take steps to ensure that my granddaughter would never be left alone without supervision again. I was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect her and provide her with the safety and care she so deserved. I just consulted with Child Protection Services, but they considered this incident to be quite serious and contacted the police. I explained that their faces quickly turned pale. I smiled sweetly and added that you too should think about your actions in prison. Samantha protested, wait, what's going on? It's bad, we need to run. Michael usually snapped quietly, calm down, it's not like they came for us right away. They both looked annoyed, so I decided to add fuel to the fire. By the way, Michael. The reason Samantha locked me up at this time is because her affair was about to be revealed. Michael's face showed confusion at my words for a moment, but then he blushed furiously and rushed at Samantha. What do you mean, you had an affair? Calm down, this old witch is just created, reconciling. Despite Samantha's attempts to calm him down, Michael remained visibly agitated. I kept talking and guessing who Samantha's partner in the novel was, James, her high school classmate, you know, the guy who lives nearby. Samantha's expression tightened, how do you know all this stuff, which she inadvertently confessed to the story itself, and Michael was now scolding her with fury. He was so angry that he could barely formulate coherent sentences. Seeing his rage, I found it somewhat funny, but I wasn't done yet. Judging by the way James is married, his wife was furious when she found out. She even threatened to sue for damages. Samantha, for obvious reasons, fell silent, so she had to find a new home, come up with excuses for the police and prepare for a huge alimony payment. The police case was almost a foregone conclusion. She would most likely be arrested. Right now she was going through the lowest point in her life, but it wasn't enough to make amends for what she did to Mia, so I decided to inflict another significant punishment. I actually hired a lawyer to investigate various cases. It turns out that Samantha was using the money I sent me as support. There should have been hundreds of thousands of dollars saved up, but the two of you seem to have spent it recklessly, especially on your hobbies and travels, which you justified as a health necessity. I took a deep breath, looking back at the messy lifestyle you've led over the years. The irony of hearing my last statement. Samantha finally snapped and started scolding me. How could you do something so terrible to me? Your own daughter is incredible. You are a completely hopeless parent. I objected that I could say the same about you. Samantha's anger flared up, but she brought this on herself. I never thought that my own daughter would sink to such a level. After all, the couple was found guilty of child abuse and sentenced to prison. Ironically, they had previously talked about breaking up over Samantha's case, but now they were both being sent to prison. The alimony claims resulting from the affair, as well as damages from the accusation of my financial support, left the couple drowning in debt. Michael lost his job due to the conviction, and, having no substantial income, they faced the difficult task of paying this significant amount. It was a complicated mix of emotions, but they brought it on themselves. I hope they will reflect and learn from their mistakes. On the other hand, I am enjoying my new life with Mia. At first she struggled to adapt to life alone with her grandmother, and the anxiety associated with her past violence weighed heavily on her. However, when my neighbors and I treated her kindly, a glimmer of light returned to her. Mia's expression often says, "Thank you, Grandma, for your help. In the circumstances it is quite natural to help her, and I am also sorry that I could not help until it got to the point that her sincere smile when she expresses gratitude warms my heart. My remaining days will be filled with time spent with Mia, although it may be short-lived. I approach each day with